All right, you guys, so factoring by grouping, if you have, say I put this arrow, if you have your leading coefficient is not a 1, on the test you might want to try factoring by grouping. It's a little bit easier, but it's not always, you can't always do it. But when you can, it is easier to do it. What we're going to do first step is I'm going to group it together. So I'm going to group these first two. It does not always have to be the first two and the last two parts together. But I can tell it works for this one, and I know the one on the test, you can do it this way. But in the future, let's go over some where we need to move those around to figure out a better way to do it. So then here, I'm going to take these first two terms, 2x cubed and x squared. And you can do this part in your head, but I want to explain what I'm doing. 2x cubed is really 2 times x, and x squared is really x times x. So I need to figure out what they have in common. So these two particular terms they each have 2 x's, right? They each have 2 x's in common. Or I guess I could have done it like this. They have 2 x's, they have 2 x's. So that's what I can factor out of those two terms. And I'm going to factor out x squared, obviously not x times x, out of this green part. So what that looks like is x squared, parenthesis, right? And then look over back to where I did that. What's left over here is 2, right? And then plus, and there's nothing here, so we put a 1, right? That could be x times 1. So 2 plus 1. And you can check yourself because you know that x squared times 2x, can't believe I didn't notice that, x times x, there's still an x left over here. X squared times 2x is x cubed, and that's why we check ourselves. And x squared times 1 is just x squared right above it. Okay, so we know that's correct. And then we're going to do the same for, why don't I do this in a different color? We're going to do the same for 4x, which is just 4 times x. Oops, I'm going to rewrite that as, because I know. 4 is 2 times 2 times x. So 4x could really be 2 times x. And the reason I chose 2 was because if I look at 2, that could really be 2 times 1, right? So what do they both have in common? They both have 1, 2 in common, right? So over here, I'm going to factor out that 2, positive 2, parenthesis, and then I still have 2 x's left over from the 4 x's, right? 2x, and then plus, and then what's left over here is a 1, right? And then look, you guys, check this out. This is 2x plus 1, and this is 2x plus 1. So that means I can factor out, again, I'm going to factor an additional time. But this time I'm going to factor out 2x plus 1. So they have that in common, a whole 2x plus 1, right? And then let's highlight this next part in yellow, you guys. What's left over here is x squared, positive, and what's left over here is positive 2. So let's write that down. Then we have x squared plus 2. Okay. Now, we still need to factor x squared plus 2, right? So what does that look like? Because I can still factor this, so I can't find all my zeros. Or, I know, I can already tell in my head it's not going to be perfectly factorable, because check this out. To find my zeros, I now need to take this and solve it for 0. 2x plus 1 is equal to 0. So what is x? I subtract 1 from each side, and then I divide both sides by 2. So x is equal to -1/2. So that is one of my zeros is -1/2. Okay? But even though I haven't factored this other part, I can still solve for x, right? I can still solve this for x. And I can already tell I'm going to get imaginary numbers. So this is going to have one real answer and then 2 more imaginary numbers. So check this out. I have x squared plus 2 is equal to 0. So I subtract 2 from each side. And you get negative 2. And then I take the square root. And I can do it this way because I only have one term being squared. Okay. Then if I take the square root of both sides, I get x is equal to positive and negative, the square root of negative 2. Okay. But negative 2 is an imaginary number, so what that really means is x is equal to positive or negative the square root of 2 times I. Right? And that reminds me, and that's two answers. One is positive square root 2i, and one is negative square root 2i. This is also reminding me off the top of my head that you guys need to make sure that you have that imaginary numbers quiz completed if you don't already. So this part right here is our real answer. And these two, we have two imaginary answers. Okay. I am not sure if the one on the test is going to have imaginary answers or not, but I know you can do it. So I have one more below this one that we can do practice by grouping. And for this one, I'm going to go ahead. I think they're in the right group here too. I'm going to leave them grouped as x cubed minus 4x squared and 2x minus 8. Okay? All right. I'm not going to do that whole thing on the side, but I know that this has at least 2 x's and this has 2 x's. So I'm going to take out x squared. Okay? What do I multiply x squared by to get x cubed? X, that's what's left over, so that if you did it backwards, x squared times x would give us x cubed, and then minus 4, right? And then x squared times negative 4 would give us negative 4x squared. And then this one, I can factor a 2 out, okay? They have 2 as a factor. So if I add 2 times what will give me 2x? That's just x. Minus 2 times what will give me negative 8? That's going to be 4. And I knew that was going to happen when I first glanced at it. That's why I didn't want to move it around, which is perfect because now I have x minus 4 and x minus 4. So I can then factor that out. So factor a second time, I have x minus 4, and then what's left over is x squared plus 2. So I got the same thing left over from the other one. So I already know these are going to be two non-real answers. One is going to be positive root 2i, and one is going to be negative root 2i. And then this 0 is going to be just positive 4, right? Cool. So ask me, please watch these questions tonight. Ask me anything you need to do before the test, and we can put up some stuff on the board for you to keep in mind. And happy studying, and I will see you tomorrow or the next day.